Hey everybody, it's Wes from Fundamental Games, bringing you today a little story about Questeros, or more specifically, a quest about Ero the Goblin. Now, this quest is based on the theory of traditional tarot deck, where the jester is the fool character. And so what I'm going to take you through is the fool's journey as it would be experienced in the Rider-Waite tarot deck, just based on some of the experiences that fool would have, but we're going to put it in the jester's perspective, going through all the quest cards, which are represented as the major arcana in Questeros. So if you're not familiar with tarot at all, this might enlighten you to some of that. If you are familiar with tarot, maybe you'll enjoy this little Ero's quest instead of the fool's journey. So we begin with the fool, the jester, Ero. It is a card of beginnings. The fool stands for each of us as we begin our journey in life. He's a fool because only a simple soul has the innocent faith to undertake such a journey with all its hazards and pains. At the start of the trip, fool, or this jester, is like a newborn, new to the world. It looks young, energetic. Its arms are out wide, ready to embrace whatever comes his way, oblivious to the cliff edge that he's about to step over. He's unaware of the hardships he will face as he ventures out to learn the lessons of the world. He doesn't actually have a number. Zero, in some of the tarot cards it's named as a 0, but he doesn't truly have a number because he's poised between the positive and the negative. He doesn't actually have a station in play right now. He's in the middle of his own individual universe. He's imbued with a desire to go forth and learn. And he does have someone at his side, his trusty companion, so there is a little bit of support nearby. So what happens from there? Well, the jester sets forth on his journey, and he comes across the Warlock, which is the magician in traditional tarot. On setting out, this magician is kind of in balance with the mentor, which is the high priestess. So it's a balancing force. It is a feature of the material universe that as soon as we name some aspect of our experience, we can actually invoke its opposite as well. So the Warlock here is on the positive sides. He represents the active masculine power of creative impulse. He's the force that allows us to impact the world through a concentration of individual will and power. You can see that in his strength, in his confidence, in the magic evoking, swirling about him. And he has all of the icons that you see in the deck that represent this world of Questeros at his disposal. The stave, the sword, the cup, the orb, all at his mercy. An infinite realm of possibilities. And that's what is above his head, infinite. All right, so that is the Warlock. Now, the High Priestess, which is the mentor, she is more about the negative side. She is a mysterious unconscious. You don't quite know what's happening. Why is she floating? What is in her hand? How is she able to make that mysterious crown above her? She provides the fertile ground in which events occur, which is why there's such lush foliage and pomegranates behind her. She is our unrealized potential, waiting for an active principle to bring it to expression. You can see her crescent-shaped moon kind of weapon in front of her. You can see some other imagery in here which invokes that mysteriousness. Now, the terms positive and negative don't simply imply good or bad, so it's not like the Warlock is good and the mentor is bad, per se. It's just that they are absolutely equal in value and importance. We might view negative as our shadow, but without shadows we cannot see the light, and without a ground of potential we cannot create. And I really love the way the artwork brings these characters to life. The stable, confident, grounded Warlock, the floating, mysterious, kind of knowledgeable mentor are both very much at play here. And from then, so in Ero's quest, he learns many things. He gets trained by the Warlock, gets inspired and told what to do, understands that he has all these tools at his disposal, and set forth on his quest. And then the mentor, she helps educate him and enlighten him to understand that there's more than just the physical world, and that's where he learns his magic. So if you play the solitaire game, the mentor is where the jester first acquires magical skills. So let's set the Warlock and the mentor aside. And we will focus next on the Empress, which is the centaur. As Ero grows, as the jester, the fool grows, he becomes more and more aware of his surroundings. Like most babies, at first he recognizes his mother. Now, the centaur is not his natural mother, but she is a warm, loving woman, the lady, the Empress of the forest. She nourishes and cares for him. He comes to know Mother Earth, who nurtures him in a larger sense, and so this centaur represents Mother Earth. She is nature herself, being that she is half horse. She represents the world of nature and sensation. You can see there's kind of harvest and grain growing, showing that it's fertile. The baby delights in exploring everything he touches, tastes, and smells. He can't get enough of the sights and sounds that enchant his senses, so the jester really is enjoying this experience in the forest and the new world that he's been exposed to, because he's been imprisoned for the past 5 years as a jester of the king's court, and finally was released by the Warlock, free, not necessarily to do his own bidding because he's been sent forth on a quest to slay the dragon, but just the fact that he is free in the world and is able to understand the nature that's out there. And he's got this representative, Mother Earth, who helps surround him with her support. And so in the solitary game, she provides him with one necessary thing that he chooses that he needs that will help him develop in the game, but also in his life. So that is the centaur. Let us move on to the emperor. So the Empress is like the mother figure, Mother Nature. The dwarf king is more like a father figure. He is he's strong. He is capable. He's got the whole world in his hand. He has the power of Taurus and rams at his disposal. Stone, hard earth, all there. So again, he's a representative of structure and authority. Just like a baby leaves his mother's arms, he learns that there are patterns to the world. Objects respond in predictable ways that can be explored. Ero the Goblin here, like a child, will experience a new kind of pleasure that comes from discovering this order, structure, and defined form that comes. And he also encounters rules. This dwarf king is one to enforce rules and require an authoritarian state in order to keep his realm at bay. The people in authority will enforce these guidelines, such as the dwarf king. These restrictions can be frustrating for someone like the jester who wants freedom, but through the patient direction of this stoic figure, the fool, the jester, our Ero, will begin to learn his purpose. And so in the solitaire game, you have to sacrifice something of importance to the dwarf king, show him your strength so that he may in turn give you that strength back when you need it most. All right, now we're moving along to what was the Hierophant, and in this game we're calling it the Necromancer. A little bit darker. I mean, this is a dark fantasy world setting here. So what is the Hierophant? Traditionally, the Hierophant is what takes place when the fool ventures out of his home into the wider world. He becomes exposed to the beliefs and traditions of culture and begins to form a formal education. The Hierophant here represents the organized belief systems that begin to surround and inform the growing child. Now, because this is a darker fantasy setting, he's realizing that there is true evil in the world. There is darkness. There is fear to be had. The Hierophant in this particular deck represents that. He represents arcane knowledge and mysteries. He is a religious figure, and in the normal Rider-Waite tarot deck, it would be two acolytes or religious figures in front of him. In this case, it's two zombies that he's brought back to life. He's got power over life and death itself. And so although the image is traditionally religious, This shows it is a symbol for initiations of all kinds. In this case, an initiation of rebirth for these zombies of total control. Our child, Ero, is trained in all practices of society and can become a part of a particular culture or worldview. So he may see this side, and it's at a point in his journey where he could side with the darkness and support this dark lord, or work against him. And so in the game, we are gearing Jester towards the brighter path and having to take down the Necromancer. But we move on. We move on to the Succubus, which is the lovers in Rider-Waite. Eventually the Fool faces new challenges. He experiences the powerful urge for a sexual union with another person. In this particular game, this deck, this world, it's not him himself that experiences it, but he does see true love in the eyes of these two individuals. Even entrapped as they are and spelled as they are to this dangerous succubus creature, they would have loved each other regardless. So although he is genuinely self-centered as a goblin, it's in his nature, he sees the balance and the nurture in these two lovers and yearns for a relationship of his own. But he needs to decide upon his own beliefs. It's well enough to conform while he learns and grows, but at some point he must determine his own values if he is to be true to himself. And so maybe that won't be the path for him in the future. Maybe it will, but just kind of it was an odd card to put into a fantasy setting, and this is how I ended up going forth with it. But let us move on to the Paladin, which is the chariot in Rider-Waite. By the time he becomes an adult, by the time, in our case, Ero is fully understanding the world that he's been segregated from for the past 5 years, he has regained a strong identity and a certain mastery over himself. And that's represented by the mastery and confidence that you see in the Paladin. Through discipline and willpower, he's developed an inner control that allows him to triumph over his environment, just like the Paladin has triumphed over the wild lions pictured here. We see this proud, commanding figure riding victoriously through the world. He has invisible control of himself and all he surveys. For the moment, the Fool's assertive success is all he might wish, and he feels a certain self-satisfaction. He is the assured confidence of his youth. So this Paladin represents Ero's confidence and strength and newfound knowledge, and just his exuberance at this point in time. But we move on. So next we have what we call justice. The Fool must now decide what this vision means to him. We see here the scales of justice on the Valkyrie's shield. She may look blind, but there is an eye upon her temple. She does see more than it first appears. And Ero himself has to look back over his life to trace the cause and effect relationships that have brought him to this point, the situations that have led him to where he is now. He has to take responsibilities for actions that he has ahead of him and for things he's done in his past, and those will balance towards what his future becomes. This is a time of decision-making for Ero. He is making important choices. Will he remain true to his insights, true to the task set forth to him to slay the dragon, or will he veer off his quest, fleeing for the mountains and hoping never to be found by the dangerous Warlock and mentor? It would be a easier, less aware existence, and might even be peaceful, but it wouldn't solve the world's problems, and who knows what fate might have in store if he did. We move on to the Hermit, which is the Druid. You see this guy high on a snowy mountain peak, only one light to guide him. Sooner or later, the Fool is led to ask himself the age-old question of why. He becomes absorbed with a search for answers, not from idle curiosity, but out of a deeply felt need to find out why people live, if only to suffer and die at the hands of others at times, or to be subjugated as he was to the king's rule and forced to be a jester in court. The Druid represents the need to find a deeper truth. You can see he has the light. He has the answers. The Fool begins to look inward, trying to understand his feelings and motivations. Ero the Goblin here, he feels that the world holds less attraction for him, and he seeks moments of solitude away from the frantic activity of society and the cause and the quest that was forced upon him. But in time, he will seek a teacher or a guide that can perhaps guide him on the right path, and that's where the Druid comes in. Once we've had that moment, we come forth to the deck of fate, which is the Wheel of Fortune in Rider-Waite. So after much soul-searching, Ero the Goblin begins to see how everything connects. You can see this circle of cards. He sees how they all can intertwine and layer upon one another and have effects. You can see that the serpent swirls around and represents eternity and cycle. The deck of fate, this whole card, this whole imagery represents a mysterious universe whose parts work together in harmony. When Ero glimpses the beauty and order of the world, if only briefly, he may find some of the answers that he is seeking. Sometimes experiences may seem to be the work of fate itself. A chance encounter or a miraculous occurrence can begin a process of change, and Ero may recognize his destiny in the sequence of events that lead him to this turning point. But having been solitary all on his own, he feels he's ready for movement and action again. He's had his time of solitude with the hermit, his self-reflection. It's time to move on and pursue his quest, renewed with vigor and a hope that the future is a positive thing. His sense of purpose is restored. So we move forth and we find strength. Over time, life presents Ero the Goblin with new challenges, some that can cause suffering and disillusionment. He has many occasions to draw on the quality of strength. We see that strength in this card, a stoic female in tune with this powerful owl bear creature that is normally wild and untamed. She has the strength and confidence to have it at her side. We see that Ero is pressed to develop his courage and resolve and find the heart to keep going despite setbacks. The sun may appear that it's setting behind them, but the future is bright. Ero discovers the quiet attributes of patience and tolerance. Much like you see in this elven ranger, it requires a lot of patience and tolerance to tame wild creatures, to live in the wild, to embrace that side of things. He realizes the willful command of the chariot, or the paladin, as we saw, has to be tempered by the kindliness and the softer power of a loving approach, which this elf woman represents. At times, intense passions can surface just when he thinks he has everything, including himself, under control. Sometimes you can have those moments where indulgence overcome your personal strength, but you must be strong to prevent that. Let us move on to what is normally the hanged man. Here we have the assassin hanging upside down from a ship's mast with the sun in the background. But what does that mean? Undaunted, the fool, Ero rushes on. He is determined to realize his vision, but he finds life is not so easily tamed. Sooner or later, he encounters this personal cross, an experience that seems too difficult to endure, being tracked by an assassin who is supporting this dragon for some reason, or being paid for other reasons to take him down. He must find a way not to give up and let go and suffer. Instead, find a way around it. He believes he has sacrificed everything, but from the depths he learns an amazing truth. He finds that when he relinquishes his struggle for control, everything begins to work as it should. By becoming open and vulnerable, the fool discovers the miraculous support of his inner self. He learns to surrender to his experiences rather than fighting them. He feels a surprising joy and begins to flow with life. The sun that is beaming behind the mast shows that life is shining behind this dangerous obstacle in front of him. If he can only bypass it or prevent it or avoid it or talk his way out of it, get past this danger, there is a brighter life ahead of him. He feels suspended in a timeless moment, free of urgency and pressure. In truth, his world has been turned upside down. And so normally when you see this card, you may think that it should go like this. And the card is intentional to look upside down when it truly isn't. So we get past the Hanged Man and we move forth to what is normally death. Here is the Death Knight. The imagery is very, very similar. So Ero now begins to eliminate old habits and tired approaches. He cuts out non-essentials because he appreciates the basics of life. He's moving onward. He goes through endings as he puts the outgrown aspects of his life behind him. His process may seem like dying, hence the figure that is dead on the ground, the Death Knight hovering above, the fearful woman and child that you can see right behind the hill, and the cleric who seems to be praying not to take them out or his own life. He sees all of this and sees this ending, but his familiar self is there to allow for the growth of a new one. At times, this inexorable change seems to be crushing the fool, seems to be crushing Ero, but eventually he rises up to discover that death is not a permanent state. It is but a transition to a new, more fulfilling way of life. And thus you see the two towers in the far distance with the sun rising, showing that the future is bright. And this, we don't know the circumstances for what happened to this man or why he was slain or if the others are even in danger. So perhaps this is not as morbid as it looks at first glance. We move on to the Fairies. The Fairies are representing the card Temperance in the Rider-Waite deck. Since embracing the Druid, the Fool has swung wildly back and forth on an emotional pendulum from self-enclosed to open thoughts. We see that he now realizes the balancing stability of temperance. He discovers true poise and equilibrium. So much like these three fairies must have the perfect balance of liquids and timing and concoctions to get the right formula that they're trying to blend together. So too do we see that Ero has to balance these things. By experiencing the extremes, he has come to appreciate moderation. The Fool has combined all aspects of himself into a centered whole that glows with health and well-being. You see that glow in the pot, you see that glow in the candle, you see that glow in the skull with also a candle up atop. That glow is there. How graceful and soft is the angel, or in this case, these fairies' wings, compared to the powerful but rigid ruler, the paladin that we saw earlier in the deck. The Fool has come a long way in learning a harmonious life, this blending of elements, this glow, this gentleness, this combination is much, much different than the earlier cards we had encountered. But then things change again and we come to the demon. The demon, very akin to the devil in the Rider-Waite deck. The Fool has his health, his peace of mind, and a graceful composure. What more could he need? On everyday terms, not much. But in this case, Ero is courageous and continues to pursue the deepest levels of his being. He comes face to face with the devil, most dangerous enemy he's faced thus far. Although he's not necessarily an evil, sinister figure residing outside of us, he is the knot of ignorance and hopelessness lodged within each of us at some level. Our inner demons, our inner devils. The seductive attractions of the material bind us so compellingly that we often don't realize our slavery to them. These two young demons in the picture here, the chain is so weak and feeble, they could probably break it at any time. They don't realize that they might not truly be enslaved, and Ero may not realize he could free them if he wished. The price of ignorance is an inner core of despair, is what this is supposed to represent. Now, this is one of the harder cards to represent in this particular deck, this fantasy deck. I think the visual is there, but how it pertains to Ero's quest in this world is a bit different, because he is actually going to defeat the evil that is the demon in this card. But when he does that, he gets severely injured. It takes a lot of effort and inner strength to bypass the demon. And so while he is weak, he moves on to the tower, the Order of the Magi. How can the Fool free himself from the dangers and suffering that he had at the hands of the devil? How can he find a way to move on and still defeat the dragon, the fool may only find release through a sudden change, which is represented by this tower. It is the ego fortress each of us has built around our beautiful inner core. It is gray, cold, and rock hard. It seems to protect, but it is actually a prison. Sometimes only a monumental crisis can generate enough power to smash the walls of the tower. On this card we see a lightning bolt striking down upon the top of the tower. Was it called forth by this cultist on the top, or was it a natural case? We don't really know. It has ejected 2 occupants that seem to be tumbling to their deaths. You see them falling. There are even some flames on them. The crown of the tower indicates that maybe they were once rulers. We don't know. The fool may need such a severe shakeup if he's to free himself from the terrors that he faced encountering the demon, but the resulting revelation can make the painful experience worthwhile. The dark despair is blasted away in an instant, and the light of truth will be free to shine down. So a very monumental card after a very challenging encounter. We would move on to the Order of the Knights, which is the Star. This is suffused with a serene calm. You see these gentlemen here, they seem like they are very protective, that even though the woman is alone in the distance, there is likely no danger to her. The Order of the Knights are on your side. They're there to support and protect you as well. Radiant stars shine on their shields, serving as a beacon of hope and inspiration. Ero is blessed with a trust that completely replaces the negative energies he encountered with the devil. With this newfound support, he feels he has an ally in his quest to slay the upcoming dragon. He wishes to share his joy generously with the rest of the world. His heart becomes more open and his love pours out freely, much like the water in the urn in the distance. This peace after that terrible storm that the demon incurred is a magical moment for our dear jester. But more to come as we find the Order of the Shadows. What effect could spoil this perfect calm? Is there another challenge for the fool? In fact, it is his bliss that makes him vulnerable to the illusions of the moon. The fool's joy, or Ero the Goblin's joy, is a feeling state. His positive emotions aren't yet subject to mental clarity. And so in his dreamy condition, he is susceptible to fantasy, and perhaps he's a distortion of the truth or doesn't realize that danger is still out there. We see bizarre and beautiful thoughts bubble up from the unconscious. There are wolves devouring life in the field. There's a giant crab emerging from the side of a lake. In the distance, we see what at first looks like a strong fortress, but then looking closer, it's being infiltrated by 2 shadows. Are those led by this figure in the forefront, or is that person going to help defend him? We don't really know at first glance, but we know that there's some fear and anxiety in this situation. There's death foretold from the wolves. There is concern about the tower. We don't know what to expect. So our dear Ero could feel lost and bewildered. And with this card itself, if you don't have what you need for this card, it won't give you support. You have to have the right action to be played at the right time in this solitaire game to support the Orders of the Shadows. Alright, we move on to the Sun. Now the Sun, this gentleman may look a little more angry than the card should represent. Normally there's a baby on the Rider-Waite Tarot card, so this one was a bit interesting to convert over. But it is the lucid clarity of the sun that directs the jester's attention and imagination. The sun's illumination shines in all hidden places. It lightens everything. It dispels the clouds of confusion and fear, enlightening the fool to feel and understand the goodness in the world, which can also be represented by the charging unicorn behind this gloomy-looking monk. He enjoys vibrance and energy and enthusiasm. The openness of the star earlier helped solidify this into an expansive assurance. Riding out into the new day is that charging horned stallion, And then we see vitality with the large sunflowers that are basically towering above the wall that might originally be thought of as impenetrable, but also protective. Ero becomes involved in grand undertakings as he draws himself everything he needs. He's able to realize his greatness. We move on to judgment. So overhead we see someone with a horn blaring. What is it? Is it for the good or for the bad? How do we know? Ero himself feels reborn. His false ego self has been shed, allowing his radiant true self to manifest. He does want to be there. He does want to help the world. He's discovered that joy, not fear, is at life's center. He feels absolved. He forgives himself and others, knowing that his real self is pure and good. He may regret past mistakes, perhaps before he met the king, or thoughts of what he might do to the king if he ever saw him again. But now he knows that those thoughts may have been due to his ignorance of his true nature. He feels cleansed and refreshed, ready to start anew. It is time for Ero to make a deeper judgment about his life. It is his own personal day of reckoning that has arrived, much like we see these figures in the forefront. Are they supporting this bard flying overhead, or are they trying to bring it down? You see the tombstones behind them. What is that? Is it death, or is it a celebration of their lives? We have to choose wisely which values we will cherish and which we will discard, what position we'll put ourselves in. You can see the flying bard up ahead, towering above with the trumpet, is a higher self-calling to rise up and fulfill your promise. Help you discover your true vocation, or in Ero's case, the reason for entering this life. Doubts and hesitations should vanish, and he is now ready to follow his dream, to face the final encounter, knowing he has the support of the Magi and the blades and the monk with the chalice and the Order of the Shadows were all there to support him, with the bard cementing and sealing that fate in a positive way. Which leads us to the dragon, which is the world card in Rider-Waite, the last card of the major arcana. Ero re-enters the world, but this time with a more complete understanding. He's able to use everything he's found, all the learnings and people and circumstances that have led him to this point, allow him to integrate all those disparate parts of himself and achieve his wholeness. He defeats the dragon, or at least in the solitaire game, that is the goal. When you defeat the dragon, he has reached a new level of happiness and fulfillment. He experiences life as full and meaningful. You can see that the dragon's tail that goes in a circle around represents that completeness, as does the world in its center. He has found his world. He has found his true purpose and promise and calling. He became actively involved in the world by interacting with every one of those major arcana characters, from the Warlock to the Priestess, or the Empress, or the Centaur, or the Hierophant, which was the Necromancer. All these characters that he encountered are all his involvement in the world, and he realizes every one of them was important, whether he felt it was right at the time or not. And so now he acts with an inner certainty, and his whole world understands. He realizes that the world conspires to see that his efforts will be rewarded, and his accomplishments are many. He becomes recognized in the world as not just a goblin entertainer or lesser life form, but a true hero. Ero becomes the hero of Questeros. And so the fool's journey, the jester's journey, Ero's quest was not so foolish after all. Through perseverance and honesty, he re-established the spontaneous courage that first impelled him to leave his goblin kind and enter the world, where he originally became lost and trapped. He is now a free and proud soul, recognized by creatures of all kinds across the globe. This particular cycle might be over, but for Ero, he will never stop growing. Soon he'll be ready to begin a new journey that will lead him to even greater levels of understanding. And so there you have it. Throughout the 21 cards of the major arcana plus our dear Ero the Jester, or the Fool, we have found our way and discovered all of these interesting characters and how they relate not only to Questeros, but to maybe our own lives, if you were to draw these cards, from life and love and strength and uncertainty, balance, isolation, kind of a certainty of fate, strength. We have uncertain purpose and dangers. We have potential death and rebirth. We have a sense of completion and understanding of what makes up the world, fighting our inner demons and understanding that we can be free if we wish to, finding solutions in dangerous places and allies in areas we might not expect it, gathering together and understanding that we all have a place in this world. Questeros brings all this to you in a very colorful format. All of this art is by the extremely talented John DeCampos. He ran a game called Token Terrors on Kickstarter. He's doing all of the line work for this game. He did all the coloring for these cards, as well as the court cards, which I may talk about in a future session here, but just really wanted to share all of these amazingly colorful and detailed pieces of artwork with a kind of a retro theme to them, but all very in tune with tarot, as it were. Thank you so much for watching. If you got through this whole video, maybe you learned something about tarot or something about the Fool's Journey. At the very least, you got to see some really cool artwork in a really cool format, led by our dear friend Ero the Goblin. Good night.